I just realized that I hadn't gotten to talk about the religion or the religious nature of the axiom of choice, because there is one. And what it is since we always have the three natural choices to start, sustain, and stop anything, we then also have the ability to start, sustain, and stop our own lives. That means that we got to choose to come here. We chose to put ourselves here. This is one of the things that happens, like when you choose an axiom, it goes backwards and forwards. So it's like I have to now go backwards toward the more fundamental and explain how that's there, as well as projecting it into the future about saying which choices should we make in the future and which ones shouldn't we make. It also goes backwards in trying to explain how it is that we are capable and why it's beneficial for us to be able to start, sustain, and stop anything. So the explanation is that we get to choose to come here. That the reason that we get born is not because we get put into a body, but rather because we merge with it. We grab onto it and live inside it. And I think that every living being has a soul, but I also believe that every inanimate object also has a soul. And I also think that everything ultimately is made out of souls. That everything is spiritual, ultimately. And that the physical world is just a projection of the spiritual, not that the spirit is somehow an inward projection of the physical world. And what I mean by that is, if there's something bad that happens to you in your life, and you question the nature and value of existence because of it, that's backwards. That's taking the physical world as if it were gospel, and then ascribing whatever the physical world has done or said to you, and taking that into your own soul and using that to judge existence itself and your own soul. Even if it's something like Job, where you get that inflicted upon you by God himself somehow, or at the very least with God allowing it to happen, it isn't something that you would be able to levy against God, because you can't take the way that the physical world exists, the physical arrangement of matter and energy as it currently exists, as if it were gospel, because it just is the way that it is because it has to be that way. It has to be integrated in this particular specific arrangement, because if it were any other way, then everything would cease existing. And we know this scientifically because of the fine-tuned universe findings. You know, if there's several of these parameters, like if the cosmological constant were any different, we wouldn't be here. If gravity wasn't exactly the way that it is, with the magnitude of its force being the way that it is, we wouldn't be here. I mean, there's so many things, and the parameters are only ever going to increase toward infinity, and they will, through their grouping like that, make such a tight range that it's like a one in a googolplex of a probability that we would have ever been able to exist at all. That random chance alone couldn't possibly account for such precision and such a specific arrangement of things. And so you could look at it and say that the physical world should be taken as gospel because God created it like that. Or you could say that because of the fine-tuning argument, that it must be like that. And then, derive things from that also if you wanted to. I don't. I believe that we all choose to come here, and that we aren't brought here because of the physical arrangement of matter and energy. We're a spirit, and we choose to go over here in this body when it gets born, instead of going to some other body. And spiritually, I don't believe that time plays out like it does here. It's like sequential. It's like a flip book. Spiritually, I think that time works like a flip book. It's every page is in there. It's just that there's no one flipping through them to make the image move. But all those images are still there. They just aren't being flipped through at the moment. And so, we make these choices, and we make these choices because of our intuitive grasp of what is valuable and what isn't valuable, and we make those decisions based upon some kind of a fundamental quintessence of our soul. It might be the location of our soul, as God's light penetrates the nothing and bathes over it with its light. Then wherever that light hits the nothing, that location becomes a soul. And so then that soul would have relativistic location to other souls, and then that soul would be oriented, hopefully, toward the light, toward God, and it would see that light from a particular standpoint or viewpoint, because it would be positioned in some particular way. When it first got bathed in God's light, that's where it was at. And so you could say, given the time before the light hit, then that point could have been any other point, could have been any position, could have been anywhere at any time in making these decisions. But it wouldn't be able to occupy a position relative to God yet, because it wouldn't have yet been bathed in God's light. It would just be a point of nothing in a void of nothing. And so because nothing has no referent and no reference frame, then it's a free-form area where everything can just move around and whatever be interchanged with everything else. Or at the very least, if it can't move, it can be interchanged with any other part, because any part of nothing is interchangeable with any other part of nothing. It's all nothing. It's all void. It's all absence. It's not a presence of something yet. And so it can just be in whatever position that it is. Now, maybe it's in the positions that it's in because it chose it. That's what I believe. Maybe it's in the position because it's random, and that's just the way the dice rolled. Maybe it's in that position because God put it in that position. Maybe it's some kind of a combination of those three. Maybe it's something totally different that I've never even thought of. But I lean toward the idea that I made the choice to be where I am, because I always do. I feel like I'm always putting myself in places and that I'm making decisions. And that because there isn't anyone placing me in these areas, that I'm free to choose how I approach or am oriented in it. And so I believe that we chose to come here to this particular body by choosing our position before God's light bathed over us. We'd already made our choice. We got an eternity of time before God's light reached us. It reaches us, our soul forms, and it forms in a particular location. And given that location, it has a particular view because that's where it is. Now, can it change its position over time? I believe that it can. I believe that the fundamental quintessence of the soul is not static. And that's one of the reasons that I believe in the ability and the value of choice. Is I don't think of myself as a static entity that has always been exactly the same. I think that my essence, my spiritual essence, can change. And it doesn't necessarily have to remain the same identity or the same traits or the same attributes, the same personality, always and forever. I think that it can change. Now, it might be the case that most of the time I spend most of my energy in a particular area or focusing on particular things, and these habits tend to have their own momentum. And that's what most people grab onto to say, that's who I am, because I always do that. I always say that. I always go there. I always don't do this, or I always do that. And then so they say, well, that's who I am. But I don't think that that is who someone is. I think that those are just habits, and that they can change, because you can stop doing something like drugs, and then you're no longer a drug user, so your identity changes. You can choose to go into some other field, and you're no longer a police officer. You're retired. You put in your gun and your badge, and you go and be a scientist, or you go be a doctor, or you go home and paint Bob Ross paintings, or whatever it is, but you're not a police officer anymore, so that's no longer your identity. And so all these identities that people think that are static, that apply only to them, that are endemic to them, I think that's true to a certain extent. That's true where they are at that time. But I don't think that it's true for every single instance, all the fucking time, forever. I think that people can change. And I don't think that there really is anything in my soul that is ultimately static, that doesn't always change. It changes. My personality changes. Now, there's some things that take so long to change that maybe I won't see it within my own lifetime, and I'll continue to have the same viewpoints throughout my entire life, in some ways. And I think that that's true for everyone, that people carry some axioms with them forever, and they don't even realize that they keep them, or why that they believe that they're even real, but they do, and they affect their decisions, and they don't ever change during their whole life. Okay, but then after they die, who's to say that they don't change in their next life? So I don't think that it's necessary that there's anything in my soul that can't ever change. I think that there's things that are just relatively more static than others. There's things that are relatively more stable about me than there are others, and that's how it is with everything in reality. There are no fine-cut, sharp edges anymore. All edges are fuzzy. Every single edge in existence is a fuzzy edge. And that coastline problem applies to everything all the time forever, because it's not just the coastline that we can't measure. It's every definitional limit in existence. It's all limits. We can't measure any limit with perfect precision and still apply it to the real world. If we attempt to make a measurement fit a perfect, precise unit, we can do that, but then we can't ever show that in reality. We can never demonstrate it. We can never apply it, and we'll never find it here in the physical world. We can have it in theory. We can have it in concept. We can have it in math. We can have it in scientific quote-unquote data, but we can't have it physically happen in the real world. By the time the scientific instruments are recording the data, the functionality and the limits of the instruments that are recording the information, those limits are not the same limits as reality. They're even further constrained. They must be, because they're recording something at the exclusion of everything else. There is no scientific instrument that can take all information in simultaneously about everything. It has to focus that on something, and therefore it has to be focused on something else. So every bit of information that we get extracted from reality has inherently within the extraction process, there is error that occurs. It's the same as if I pick an object up off the ground. I do change it necessarily. It's tiny, but I leave a fingerprint on there. I shift the atoms around. When I pick it up, I interact with it. When I interact with it, I change it. So, that's that observer issue problem. It makes perfect sense, of course. When I pick something up, I'm changing it because I'm interacting with it. I'm connected to it. That's how I pick it up. I connect it to me, and the change from it being disconnected from me to it connecting to me, that change is non-zero, and it's a change throughout the entire object. Everything about it changes. Its position in space, its position in time, its position, and what I mean in time is the relativistic speed at which it's going through time, because that is determined by its velocity, which is determined by its mass, which changes when it connects to a larger mass. It will affect it in some way, and it affects it throughout. And it's small, but it's measurable and it's non-zero. And so what that means is, given the fact that all scientific instruments artificially constrain the information they receive about reality, and given the fact that all scientific instruments interact with and thus change reality when they extract information from it, then we can't say that any scientific data that we receive is absolute gospel. There's some error in there. It's minute, but it is there. And so it can't be used as an absolute instrument. This is one of the reasons that I'm an idealist. The limits of the ideal are far grander and far greater than the physical limits of reality as an object, or as an objective arrangement of matter and energy. It just can't ever be as precise as our ideal measures. So even though, like I said, there are always fuzzy limits, well, the thing that happens when you have absolute consistency, absolute idealistic theoretical precision, is that you then say, I can say that with perfect precision, but I can't say anything about anything else. I can't extend that. It's just stuck in this one point, this one data point, this one measured point, this one information bit, as isolated from anything that doesn't exist within the system that it's connected to. So the fuzziness of the limit goes away from the details of the task at hand and toward the greater paradigmatic limits of the theory itself as related to other theories. In other words, the measuring tool itself becomes fuzzy in order for the fuzziness of reality to match precisely onto it. You have to make the measuring tool itself fuzzy. So then you can have that perfect precision, but you only get it in that one instance that you used the ruler, in that one system by which you used that fuzzy ruler. And the moment that you change rulers, it's going to change the data. So the way that we measure reality is affecting reality, and the limits by which we use to measure reality are either fuzzy internally, like the data point itself doesn't match onto physical reality precisely, but yet the paradigmatic limits are precise, such that I know exactly which system it is that I'm using to measure. I know what the ruler looks like exactly, but yet, because of the precision of the ruler being more precise than the thing that I'm measuring, the data point that I receive is going to be fuzzy because of that. That's what happens when our physical laws are more precise than the physical reality that demonstrate those laws. And that's why when we calculate exactly how far away a star is, it's going to change depending on the set of data that we feed into it. And that's the fuzziness that we get with the data if we don't have fuzziness in our measurements. And so that might make a little bit more sense. If the instrument is tuned too tightly, then you're not going to be able to play as versatile a scheme. It'll only be able to be used for like a tight range of songs or whatever. I'm trying to come up with as many analogies as I can because it's a really weird, bizarre, abstract, abstruse kind of concept. But it happens when our theory is more precise than the reality that we're measuring. Reality, physical reality, is fuzzy. It's fuzzy. It's not exactly precisely sharp. Like, if I were to say, oh, well, the exact sharp edge of that picture right there. Oh, well, it has an exact sharp edge. Really zoom in, and you'll find that it's jagged as hell. Because what it is it's going to be a bunch of these pixels that are either lit or not lit. And as you zoom in, you're going to find that there's some of them are going to be over here and some of them are going to be over there. Or there's going to be spaces in between those pixels that get bigger and bigger and bigger. And those spaces in between the pixels are going to create giant-ass, jagged, rugged limits, coastlines, as far as where that sharp edge is. So there really isn't a sharp edge. The sharpness of the edge is actually measuring the matching between the resolution of the reference frame to its referent. So the sharpness is in the zeroness, the absence of distance between the reference frame and the referent relations to each other. In fact, I'm going to have to write that down.